I exposed a so-called friend's dark secrets, revealing he was a sexual predator and caused his career to crash. Unexpectedly fulfilling. This is a narrative about an individual I once regarded as a friend. He remains entirely unaware that I am the principal person responsible for his exposure, and I intend to maintain this anonymity. The key figures in this account include myself, Badass Pilot, Girlfriend 1, Girlfriend 2, Girlfriend 3, a young female pilot, and several other individuals who play minor roles in the story. I witnessed much of this firsthand, but I have also incorporated details from others who were present when I wasn't. I fully trust the accounts provided. As implied by his title, Badass Pilot is indeed a pilot, yet he does not work for any airline. Beginning in his 20s, he was employed by a flight school as an instructor, but he opted to venture out on his own, claiming he could do it better. For the next several years, he endeavored to tarnish the reputation of his initial employer. Badass Pilot is charming and charismatic, and many people admire him, myself included. When he first starts out, he drives an incredibly unreliable vehicle, lacks an office, gets evicted from his apartment for non-payment of rent, and so forth. However, people rally around him, assisting in establishing and renovating his flying school, offering him general support. Occasionally, he angers individuals due to his inconsiderate behavior towards others, but his circle of friends defends him and perceives him positively. He shares outrageous stories, possesses a good sense of humor, and people are drawn to his company. Many of his anecdotes contain exaggerated details aimed at belittling others, yet he narrates them in a highly entertaining manner. His conduct is somewhat erratic, and part of the reason people associate with him is the unconventional and reckless activities he engages in addition to hosting enjoyable parties. Additionally, he has a lovely girlfriend, Girlfriend 1, and they cohabitate. To clarify, she is quite remarkable. She is not overly dramatic, is enjoyable to be around, and organizes a significant birthday celebration for him on his 30th. While he is with Girlfriend 1, he continues to pursue other women when she isn't around. On several occasions, I have observed him discreetly woo a captivating young woman, usually in a vulnerable situation, like someone amidst a difficult breakup. He lavishes them with attention, induces them to become infatuated with him, and fabricates stories of infidelity involving Girlfriend 1 or suggests they are on a break. After sleeping with them, he typically ceases all communication, claiming they are unstable and doing everything possible to dispose of them before Girlfriend 1 becomes suspicious. For instance, following his infidelity with one woman, she attempted to reach out after he ghosted her, which is a reasonable action. Instead of confronting her directly, Badass Pilot falsely claimed to everyone that she was deranged and stalking him, reporting her to his friends in law enforcement, who subsequently contacted her to demand she cease communication. Furthermore, he begins to spread absurd tales about Girlfriend 1, openly disparaging her behind her back, telling others what a failure she is, and generally failing to appreciate a relationship that many would envy. This exemplifies his treatment of women. When Badass Pilot and Girlfriend 1 finally separate, he informs others that she was disloyal to him, despite it being the opposite. His justification for ruining a pivotal interview for his dream job was that he discovered Girlfriend 1's supposed infidelity the night prior, leading him to an emotional breakdown, which he claimed was the reason for his poor performance. Numerous discrepancies in his timeline led me to doubt his story, but he shared this narrative openly with anyone who would listen, and people readily accepted his account. Consequently, he succeeded in turning everyone against his ex while garnering sympathy for himself, a familiar pattern. In any case, after their breakup, he indulges heavily in alcohol, parties continuously, and many of us witness firsthand as he comes dangerously close to ruining his life, behaving inappropriately, relentlessly hitting on women, and engaging in affairs with anyone who would sleep with him, all while setting new records for his low standards. A few months later, he begins a relationship with one of his students, let's refer to her as Girlfriend 2, and swiftly moves into her residence. This arrangement appears to provide him with stability and a semblance of control over his life. Over the subsequent years, he receives a lucrative offer to fly corporate charters. His likable nature assists him in securing a valuable contract as a private pilot for a billionaire, which he boasts about endlessly. They also finance his jet training. He acquires a decent vehicle and relocates to a pleasant home. His flight school transforms from a chaotic environment to one that is more suitable for families. Girlfriend, too, contributes at the flight school, and life is relatively good for Badass Pilot. To cap it off, the Federal Aviation Administration seeks new personnel to fill a prestigious position as a pilot examiner. These individuals are seasoned pilots, respected and trusted within their local communities, possessing significant influence over student pilots and various flight schools. Generally, they also earn substantial incomes, as they can set any price students are willing to pay for their licenses, with little competition. Badass Pilot boasts friendships with individuals at the FAA who favor him, and he lands the position. He proclaims to others that it feels like printing money without taxation since students must pay in cash. It sounds peculiar, but it's true. And he insists that the Internal Revenue Service is unaware of his earnings. Thus, Badass Pilot now finds himself in his 30s, at the peak of his career, amassing considerable wealth and wielding considerable influence over those in the industry. Naturally, this success greatly inflates his ego. However, as you may have surmised, Badass Pilot essentially remains the same person, albeit with greater wealth, authority, and success. He continues to boast of being the finest instructor and having the premier flight school around while disparaging other local schools, despite understanding that he should refrain from such comments due to his examiner role. He shares anecdotes about his friends and students, recounting humorous stories, but I initially dismiss it as part of his persona, not noting the severity of his comments. His skill lies in encouraging others to join in criticizing those he dislikes, effectively tarnishing their reputations through outrageous fabrications. I begin to overhear him belittling Girlfriend too, and making assertions about her that I know are false. I still don't take much note of it, considering many loud personalities in aviation enjoy boasting and concocting tales. I continue to regard him as a friend, and even confided in him regarding something personal and sensitive, seeking his counsel. One day, while in town, I spent time with him and a group at Badass Pilot's flight school just chatting. After leaving, I realized I had forgotten an item, so I returned through the back, passing through the mechanic's shop adjacent to the flight school. I overheard him speaking in his typically booming voice, ensuring everyone could hear, and that's when I recognized he was discussing me. Not only was he talking about me, but he was also completely misrepresenting my vulnerable situation, distorting it into something far worse, potentially jeopardizing my career. I had believed he respected me and regarded himself as my friend, yet he was undermining my reputation and disparaging me behind my back. Fortunately, no one noticed my presence, allowing me to leave discreetly. For weeks thereafter, I felt humiliated and betrayed. Reflecting on his treatment of others led me to reassess my perception of him. I was aware that he had derailed several careers. With his extensive network in the industry, he had bragged about calling hiring companies to discourage them from hiring specific individuals. One of his habitual phrases is that aviation is a small world, and one should not burn bridges, as it may lead to unforeseen consequences later. He has boasted repeatedly about diminishing someone's success as a form of retribution for perceived wrongs, often driven by envy toward those who graduated from college, which he did not, and those from stable families, which he lacked. He constantly relays how difficult his childhood was, striving to elicit sympathy from others. It is crucial to remember that he is a grown adult in his late 30s. Additionally, despite achieving some stability with Girlfriend too, he retained his problematic behavior towards women. He feigns respect for women in Girlfriend too presence, but during trips or in his own workplace, he behaves aggressively, testing boundaries with women to see how far he can push them. For instance, he flirted suggestively with the receptionist at the neighboring building to his flight school. The receptionist, being young and relatively inexperienced, was unaware of Girlfriend too existence. She, aged approximately 18 or 19, left a flirtatious voicemail for Badass Pilot, entirely aligning with the manner in which he interacted with her. Although I was not present, a witness recounted that Girlfriend too played the message for Badass Pilot, demanding he listen. He sheepishly claimed ignorance regarding why she would leave such a message, prompting girlfriend 2 to firmly assert that he was leading her on and exploiting a young woman. Rather than accepting accountability for his actions, badass pilot retaliated against the young woman, promptly complaining to the airport manager, resulting in her termination. She departed that same day with her belongings in a box. Thus, while badass pilot is enjoyable to be around as long as one remains on his favorable side, he possesses the capacity to harm anyone he believes is against him. I understood I needed to proceed with caution. At this point, I was uncertain about my next steps, but I recognized the necessity of staying close to gather further information. Therefore, I buried my feelings of humiliation and feigned ignorance regarding his comments about me, spending additional time at the flight school during my days off. With the constant influx of individuals at the flight school, there were times I was the only attendee, allowing me to sit unobtrusively behind badass pilot's desk and explore his files. That's when I struck gold. Badass pilot was logged into all his accounts on his desktop, similar to those on his phone, email, messaging, everything. And it was clear he was an incessant texter. Some of his students had complained that he would not cease texting, even during flight instruction. A few students were so frustrated by his incessant texting during lessons that they chose to seek instruction elsewhere, and now I understood why. Badass pilot was a sex addict. That is the most fitting term for him. Some might label him a serial sexual harasser. His entire messaging history was saturated with explicit exchanges, photographs, videos, etc. It was all accessible on his computer. I documented everything. I recorded videos on my phone, took screenshots, and photographed the messages. I must have spent an hour attempting to copy this content before time ran short due to someone's return, prompting me to minimize the windows and exit the office casually. I sought assistance from another aviator whom badass pilot had wronged, and we painstakingly scrutinized the trove of evidence. We identified the phone numbers to ascertain the identities of those involved, categorizing them as known aviation or otherwise. We even discovered he was involved with a couple of individuals linked to the flight school, definitely not the family-oriented environment he had portrayed. It became evident that his cybersex activities rendered him entirely unfit for the position of FAA examiner. Numerous texts constituted blatant sexual harassment from an individual wielding significant authority within the aviation sector, flirting with and pressuring young women aspiring to become pilots for everything from risque photographs to sexual encounters, occasionally masquerading it all as a joke. He routinely sent explicit pictures to women, which alone disqualified him from being an examiner. However, he didn't stop there. He had engaged in sexual relations with at least one individual he had assessed. This is alarmingly dangerous, as it undermines his capability to determine whether a candidate is adequately qualified to operate an aircraft safely. If he faces a lawsuit or criminal charges and is required to assess one of these women, or even someone connected to them, he might feel compelled to pass an unqualified pilot, potentially resulting in tragedy. In August 2017, my pilot acquaintance and I concurred that submitting this information to the FAA was the most prudent action. However, we understood the necessity of doing so anonymously, as our careers would be jeopardized otherwise. Thus, we meticulously compiled a wealth of evidence and submitted it to the FAA office he reported to and awaited the repercussions. And nothing happened. The FAA completely ignored the evidence indicating they had a sexual predator among their pilot examiners. Given the long-standing culture within this male-dominated industry, this lack of response was hardly surprising. For our next course of action, we approached a young female pilot identified from our gathered evidence, who seemed to have tried to halt badass pilot when he behaved inappropriately with her. We discussed whether she would be open to sharing her experience with the FAA. She expressed that doing so would only result in her facing humiliation and ostracism, especially after learning that the FAA disregarded our anonymous report. She opined that badass pilot would likely destroy her career and that her reputation would suffer irreparably. I could not contradict her assessment. Fast forward to 2018, I rendered him homeless. I contemplated informing girlfriend 2 of what I had discovered but continually hesitated. I feared exposure myself, recognizing I had to safeguard my career, and I was certain Badass Pilot would retaliate if he became aware. One morning, while at the school, I was using an iPad when I noticed Girlfriend 2 texting Badass Pilot, who was away flying. I realized that Badass Pilot was logged into the flight school iPad I was operating. I could see her texts to him and noticed that he had engaged in explicit cybersex with someone the previous night, followed by sending a video of himself to a student prior to that. I documented this as evidence. While Girlfriend 2 was absorbed in her readings and not paying attention to me, I mumbled something and handed her the iPad with explicit messages displayed, and discreetly exited. I waited in my car in the parking lot, and shortly thereafter, Girlfriend 2 emerged from the school with the iPad in hand and drove home. I kept a low profile for the remainder of the day to avoid raising suspicions regarding my involvement. Apparently, Girlfriend 2 owned their residence, so she swiftly evicted him and barred him from returning, leading Badass Pilot to sleep at the flight school. From what I gathered during that week, Girlfriend 2 was profoundly unsettled by the revelations, compelling her to suggest that Badass Pilot seek therapy or she would report him to the authorities, which could lead to his arrest. It's worth mentioning that Girlfriend 2 has a child, which bears significance. Badass Pilot exploited the situation to arrange encounters for himself, organizing playdates for the children, allowing him to engage in affairs with their mothers. Badass Pilot slept on a cot at the flight school, remained intoxicated, and appeared disheveled for several months until finally securing his own residence. We ensured that Badass Pilot's billionaire employer was informed of his predatory behavior, as well as a few other individuals, all done anonymously. I wanted to ensure Girlfriend 2 was fully aware of Badass Pilot's sordid activities, should she even consider rekindling their relationship after he supposedly underwent therapy, so I continued to send her more information anonymously. The young female pilot maintained communication and reportedly engaged her own discussions with fellow female pilots. While none were willing to provide formal testimony, they began sending anonymous letters to the FAA, hoping for an investigation. The subsequent news indicated that Badass Pilot was spinning tales about breaking up with Girlfriend 2, depicting her as unhinged and seeking to ruin his reputation, alleging that she was sending false anonymous letters to the FAA out of envy. It appeared that the FAA had spoken with Badass Pilot, but no actions were taken because he attributed the letters to Girlfriend 2 jealousy. True to character, Badass Pilot succeeded in making everyone at the flight school loathe her, painting her as the villain in his narrative. He also reported her to the police, claiming she was harassing him and stated that he was prohibiting her from the flight school. Nothing further materialized. The situation began to settle down, yet Badass Pilot remained an examiner. He continued working for his billionaire employer and also for a wealthy car dealership owner who was involved in racing, all while managing a flight school with numerous students. Once again, Badass Pilot initiated a relationship with another student at the school, to be referred to as Girlfriend 3. He continually ranted about being victimized by Girlfriend 2. Badass Pilot manipulated Girlfriend 3, who had never interacted with Girlfriend 2, into becoming hostile regarding her, which would become relevant later. Fast forward to 2019, what is happening? Not only has Badass Pilot not faced any repercussions from the FAA, but they have also increased his responsibilities, granting him the capacity to conduct instrument flight exams for students. The young female pilot remained in contact, and we communicated periodically, bound to secrecy to protect ourselves. With the FAA promoting Badass Pilot to instrument examiner, despite numerous complaints against him, young female pilot and her associates grew increasingly angry. However, they were still disinclined to risk their positions. Reader, please refrain from passing judgment on me or young female pilot. The financial burden to become a pilot is substantial, and it is all too easy to earn a blacklist from the FAA or individuals like Badass Pilot, leaving one without means to earn a living or repay immense student loans while in debt. We devised a strategy to have her contact Girlfriend 2 and inform her of the collective frustrations among the other female pilots, in the hope that she might devise a plan of action. It is essential to note that Girlfriend 2 does not pursue a career in aviation and has her own non-aviation related business. Thus, young female pilot reached out to girlfriend 2 using someone else's phone. Girlfriend 2 was unfamiliar with young female pilot, and we believed trust was not an issue, but the risk remained significant for young female pilot. During the conversation, the young female pilot expressed frustration over the promotion of a persistent sexual harasser by the FAA with no consequences, having been aware of his harassment. Girlfriend 2 concurred that she would attempt to make information public to protect other women, committing to posting a review online, such as Yelp, and potentially other platforms. I endeavored to be present at the Badass Pilot Flight School during this occurrence. True to her word, Girlfriend 2 posted a straightforward and factual review on Yelp, which set off an explosion of reactions at the flight school. The review rapidly circulated throughout the aviation community. It contained revelations regarding owner sends messages of himself masturbating to female students, a shocking and entirely true claim. Other negative reviews had appeared previously, but Badass Pilot had arranged for their removal by falsely alleging they originated from a fake account or a rival flight school. However, nothing quite like this had occurred before to my knowledge. Badass Pilot and Girlfriend 3, who now seems to be a co-owner of the flight school and had posted a positive review of the school on Yelp, entered damage control mode. Badass Pilot endeavored to have Girlfriend 2 arrested, or at the very least harassed by his associates within law enforcement. He anxiously aimed to have the review removed from Yelp. His agitation was palpable, and I, along with others at the school, adopted the narrative that Girlfriend 2 was a deceitful, unstable, and vengeful individual who deserved punishment, all while I experienced gleeful amusement internally. Next, Badass Pilot enlisted one of his instructors, who happened to be friends with Girlfriend 2, to meet with her and request the removal of the review, but she refused. After a day or two, Badass Pilot ultimately succeeded in having Yelp take down the review. A similar sequence transpired involving another unnamed platform. Badass Pilot instigated an onslaught of hate messages directed towards Girlfriend 2, prompting relief that I remained anonymous. He further instructed the instructors at his school to sever ties with Girlfriend 2, stating they would face termination if they did not comply. Fast forward to August 2019, mission accomplished. What became of Badass Pilot eventually? We learned that the FAA conducted an investigation into Badass Pilot. Finally, Badass Pilot utterly lost all examination privileges. Additionally, his flight school, which had served as an FAA written testing center, was permanently shuttered. Moreover, Badass Pilot can no longer engage with the FAA in any capacity. He is even barred from hosting educational seminars or classes for FAA continuing credits. While some prospective pilots and individuals outside the industry may remain unaware of Badass Pilot's ultimate humiliation and loss of examiner status, trust me when I say that the information has disseminated throughout the profession. The knowledge of his downfall must be excruciating for him. As for myself, I have essentially returned to enjoying my time at the airport as I once did. The social gatherings and flights continue, and ultimately, some individuals remain indifferent to Badass Pilot's sexual harassment and career sabotaging. Yet he has undoubtedly received a significant blow to his ego, as he delights in boasting. I simply refrain from trusting anything he states and ensure I minimize any contribution to anyone he seeks to undermine. A slight enjoyment swells through me whenever I overhear him declare to new students that he used to be an examiner, but left the position due to exorbitant liability insurance costs. Another amusing aspect is that Badass Pilot has begun gossiping about Girlfriend 3 behind her back. I tried to forewarn her and even sent her anonymous information regarding Badass Pilot. Yet thus far, Girlfriend 3 remains steadfastly supportive of him, and I find myself simply watching the unfolding drama with popcorn in hand. In summary, a friend, who is a talented pilot, betrayed me. I uncovered his predatory behavior, and as a result, he lost his job. Story 2. I reported my noisy neighbor's illegal construction. Weeks later, he lost his permit, faced criminal charges, and his business collapsed. This is a tale about the importance of patience and how allowing someone else to seek revenge on your behalf is considerably easier than taking action yourself. The background: I reside in one of those joined houses where two residences are built next to each other with mirrored layouts, so we share a wall while being otherwise completely independent. For many years, the adjoining house was occupied by a pleasant elderly woman who remained unobtrusive, and I experienced no issues with her. However, following her passing and the sale of the property, the complications began. The individual in question is someone I will refer to as Jack Sparrow, for reasons that will become apparent later. Jack operates a substantial construction business and dabbling in real estate as well. He purchased the house and rents it out to a group of foreign construction workers employed by his company. I mention they are foreign because it is pertinent to the narrative. There are allegations suggesting that Jack engages in questionable practices to have them work at a fraction of the cost by falsely claiming they are national workers in their home country, paying them according to those wages rather than the significantly higher minimum wage in my country. This is not exactly legal. There may also be unreported labor involved. Regardless, he accommodates 4-6 of these workers in the aforementioned house during their time here. Now, I don't harbor any animosity towards foreign construction workers. However, the individuals living next to me possess two exceedingly troublesome characteristics. They are obnoxiously loud and entirely indifferent to everyone else. We are talking about incessant music and parties beginning Thursday evening and continuing throughout the weekend until they leave for work at 5 a.m. on Monday. Seriously, I have no idea when or how they manage to sleep. It is an unending situation. We are talking about I am wearing headphones, but still cannot hear my own sound over their music loud, as it seems they designated the living room, adjacent to the shared wall, as the party zone. Initially, I took the neighborly approach and tolerated it, thinking it's just one party, just one weekend. However, after the third consecutive weekend of noise, I went over to request they lower the volume. As you know, nighttime disturbances are technically illegal, audible on the street, and felt by my other neighbors, who have also voiced complaints. I was met with a half-hearted "so sorry, I'll resolve it." However, nothing changed. I approached them several more times, becoming increasingly frustrated, yet each time met with "but it's not loud. If I can hear your music within my own residence over my own television and music, I would contend that it is indeed too loud." I reached out to Jack, as he is their landlord, to explain the situation, only to receive a brusque "sorry, not my problem." Essentially, Jack dismissed my concerns. I decided to involve law enforcement, calling them every time the situation became unmanageable. After about a dozen calls, sometimes calling twice in a single evening, it became evident that even police intervention did little to remedy the issue. I should mention that I am an attorney, so I understand the legal avenues available. I also recognize that apart from a nominal ruling from a judge stating their music is too loud, I am unlikely to achieve much. It would, as had happened before, devolve into a game of cat and mouse where they would intentionally blast their music as loudly as possible to irritate me or wake me up for brief periods, such that by the time I gathered proof or the police arrived, the noise would cease. I found myself at an impasse, with only further options that seemed ineffective and a waste of time. At this juncture, I decided to bide my time and await a change in circumstances. While I do not condone individuals who harm their neighbors, I do understand the frustrations that could drive someone to that extreme. The error: one day, I was at home when I noticed an unusual commotion next door, more than what had become customary. Suddenly, I looked through my garden window and observed that a wall was being partially dismantled. Over the years, my neighbors had constructed a small adjacent building connected to the main house. It was located right on our property line, and during the time the gardens were being fenced, the wall served as a boundary to save on fencing costs. This wall was now in the process of having its upper section removed by a crane. I had not been informed about any of this work, which, while not legally required, would have been a courteous gesture. I took a walk to assess the situation and discovered that they had completely demolished the side building, leaving only the remaining wall between our gardens intact, and even that was compromised at the top. Being a lawyer, particularly one specializing in construction and permits, I know two essential things: such actions are not permitted without prior authorization from the city. There is no chance they possess the requisite permit. As I would have seen the application, I routinely check the online public database to monitor permit applications relevant to my work, including my local area. This was it. The moment I had anticipated the situation had evolved, and the time had come for me to seek retribution. I quickly sent an email to the municipal authorities, effectively fulfilling my civic duty by reporting a potential violation, noting that someone was constructing or demolishing without a permit. Since it was a straightforward report, no action was taken in response, since I was not an official victim. As no further construction took place over the next few days and all equipment had been cleared, I assumed they would only dismantle the side structure, as it had become dilapidated. The neighbors relocated all their belongings from the demolished building onto their lawn and carelessly covered them with a tarp. The following week, more construction materials arrived and work resumed. I sent another email to city services with updated photographs indicating that further plans were in motion, urging them to take appropriate action. Less than an hour later, I received an instant response. They had notified Jack after my initial report that his actions required a permit, and Jack had assured them he was unaware of that requirement, which is absurd. He is in construction, he must know, and promised to halt construction and request a permit. Following my report, they contacted him again, admonishing him for failing to comply with his earlier commitment, and once again, he said he would cease work. On that day, I happened to be working from home and had to restrain myself from waving at the construction crew as they departed. Later that day, I received an angry phone call from Jack, accusing me of reporting him and threatening that I would regret it, claiming he would seek damages due to the delays he experienced. I respectfully pointed out that even if I had indeed reported him, the reports are registered in my name but are anonymized in later documentation. I would not be at fault, as it seemed clear he lacked a permit and should have been aware of that before commencing illegal work. I ended the call before my satisfaction became too apparent. At this point, Jack was entirely oblivious to the repercussions I had set in motion. He is Jack Sparrow, and I have inadvertently awakened the beast that would ultimately destroy him. He just has yet to realize it. The beast, there exists a compelling reason why most individuals consult an expert or an attorney when seeking to apply for a permit. The regulations involved are so intricate and unnecessarily complicated that navigating them as a layperson is incredibly challenging and time-consuming, and a single misstep can derail your case entirely, requiring you to start over. I have derailed entire projects and witnessed my clients experience the same by simply pointing out that on page 127, section 35(1)(a), a response had been omitted that should have been completed. I conducted some research and discovered that the previous owners of the houses had consulted each other regarding the side building and consented to make the wall a division between their properties. They had even shared the expenses and ownership of it. The wall that Jack had partially destroyed, it was also mine, which of course entitles me to damages, but that is secondary to the key issue. The critical matter is that he requires my permission to perform any actions regarding that wall. So when he submitted a permit application a few weeks later, an additional detail, the unruly neighbor's belongings still lay out in the open, loosely covered by a tarp, as they anticipated this would be a swift demolition and replacement process, taking just a few weeks. I went to the city center to examine the application. I noted they aimed to perform work on the wall that I co-own. So, I filed a formal objection, adhering to the proper process, regarding the permit application, asserting that even if granted, it could never be executed because Jack lacked permission from me concerning the wall, and I had no intention of granting it. This should invalidate his permit, as permits cannot be issued if it is foreseen that they cannot be executed. It is illogical to grant a permit for constructing a certain type of building when you are aware that it will never actually come to fruition. Now, Jack was somewhat charming, and as a construction entrepreneur, he had his connections, and permits are as much a political decision here as they are a legal one. Thus, despite my impeccably valid legal objection that should have nullified his permit, it was approved. He even called me afterwards to taunt me a bit. No worries, though. One can appeal a permit in my country. The only prerequisite is that you pay a fee of €100, which I was more than willing to cover. The appeal body is a subnational entity and is indifferent to Jack's political associations or to the flimsy justifications city officials provided to rationalize issuing the permit despite the concerns I raised. They terminated his permit without hesitation based on the aforementioned legal grounds. Now, Jack's permit was blocked until he rectified the issue, which he could not do because I was not inclined to approve his plans for our wall. At this stage, after enduring 2 lengthy procedures, more than 7 months had elapsed. The neighbors had an incomplete construction project in their yard the entire time, required to store their belongings elsewhere, while what was initially labeled a temporary situation for a few weeks while we transformed into a drawn-out ordeal with no end in sight. But that is not all. The previous description covered the administrative aspect of the situation. Jack acquiring the permit. However, constructing without a permit is also a criminal offense. Naturally, my report was forwarded to the pertinent authorities, so now Jack was also facing a criminal case for construction violations. Not only was he at risk of fines and potential jail time, he operated a construction business and had utilized it for the work performed on the property. Thus, his company was also susceptible to penalties, with one consequence in these types of offenses being the prohibition of engaging in construction or related activities as a business, either temporarily or permanently. Not only did Jack personally face repercussions, but his entire business did as well. During this tumultuous period, Jack attempted to sell the property. This effort did not unfold smoothly for several reasons. First, the property faced an illegal situation. The demolished side building was removed unlawfully, and until that illegal status was resolved, it would impede the property. This typically diminishes property value significantly since individuals are reluctant to purchase a property with pending legal obligations, requiring time and resources to rectify by either reconstructing the removed structure or acquiring a regularization permit. This issue was exacerbated by Jack's unsuccessful attempt to secure that permit. Furthermore, Jack never intended to market the property in its current condition. As I have since learned, what he typically does is acquire inexpensive old houses like the one adjacent to mine. He places some of his crew in these residences, who are less likely to complain about the substandard living conditions. They cause extensive damage as they are uncaring, and he permits this. Then, once the place is dilapidated, he either demolishes it and sells it to a developer or undertakes the renovation himself. However, due to Jack's construction crime and the associated property status, he could not proceed with the renovation as needed. Minor repairs would not suffice, since rectifying the illegality was a requirement for any permit he would apply for regarding the building, and because of my efforts, he could not resolve it. He was unable to sell it either since the property was in a state of disarray, and any developer considering purchase would undoubtedly withdraw upon realizing the construction issue, and a vocal neighbor likely to oppose any substantial project there, since there are certainly less complicated properties available for development. In summary, therefore, that is the current state of affairs. Jack is facing a forthcoming criminal court procedure where he risks both his business and livelihood. His existing projects are now under heightened scrutiny from city services since he has been identified as someone who disregards permits and regulations. He cannot effectively market the property unless he incurs a substantial loss, as it is utterly dilapidated. He is unable to develop it or sell it to a developer because all development plans relate to the adjoining wall, which he cannot modify significantly without acquiring my permission. The disruptive neighbors are now residing in a smaller residence than their previous one, in a property they have damaged, but cannot feasibly renovate or repair in the significant way that it requires. They have settled down considerably, perhaps due to Jack directing blame towards them for his current predicament, which is not far from the truth. I have unleashed the beast upon Jack Sparrow, and it has profoundly devastated him. The most gratifying aspect is that I had to do very little to achieve this outcome. All I really did was gently prod the bureaucratic monstrosity that is municipal governance and direct it at him, and they carried out the rest. I could share that he reached out to me complaining and even pleading for permission to use the wall in the manner he needs to continue his business, arguing that he was losing money and clients due to this issue, and in jeopardy of losing everything he has worked for, requesting that I allow him to proceed, and that I smugly replied, "Not my problem." However, he did not, so for the time being, we are left to imagine that he did.